Hopefully it works. Oh, yep, it's come up on YouTube. So that's good. What's that? Yeah, that's it. Should I, I'll share my screen on Discord as well, just in case. Share screen, code pen, go live. There we go. That should come up on Discord. Facebook, cool. And that should come up on Discord as well, hopefully. Yeah, cool. Okay. So, we'll start off today. Can you hear the audio all right as well, Andrew? Yeah, cool. Okay. So, welcome back, everybody. What we'll do, because everybody's of course still getting home from school and things, just to give everybody a chance to settle in, we'll start the session off quite slowly today, just to kind of make sure that everybody has a chance to get home and get logged on and get ready and set up and things. Whilst everybody's joining, for those of you who might not have seen the message from the other day, I put something up just asking, what's everybody's opinion on sort of the time that we run the session for. So, of course, I suggested whether or not we should do it kind of like 4 till 6 still, like we have been, or if we should change it to being 4 till 5. I know that Chris, you wanted to keep it as 4 till 6, which is all good. And I know that Alex said that they didn't mind what sort of times we did. But if anybody else who's not sort of who maybe missed the message wants to give their opinion, then go for it. But as it currently stands, we'll keep things going as 4 till 6 for now, and then once everybody's had a chance to kind of reply, we'll let you know if there are being any changes. But for the time being, we're just going to stick to the 4 till 6. So that's pretty much all of the little housekeeping-y stuff that I wanted to cover. Andrew has just posted in the chat now the message that I put up the other day. So if you have a chance to look at that, and if you've got any suggestions on time changes, then let me know in the chat, and I'll let you know if we decide to go with them or not. So as I said, welcome back. I hope everybody's had a nice week. First or second week back in school now. I hope it's been going well, and that you've settled back in okay after the summer break. So as I said in the Discord the other day, what we're going to be looking at in these sessions for the next few weeks now is some web design. And the reason that we're going to go with web design is pretty much because lots of people have been, or a couple of people mentioned that they wanted to look at JavaScript. And one of course, the key things that JavaScript is used with is website design. Okay, so for those of you, I know a lot of you are already familiar with web design. But web design comprises normally of 3 different languages. So you use HTML, something which is hypertext markup language. We also have CSS, and we also have JavaScript. And each one kind of brings its own thing to the table. So HTML will help you build up sort of like your website structure, and will help you kind of place content onto the website. And then CSS will help you kind of add a bit more design and creativity to the website, so you can alter its structure a little bit more in terms of its layout and things like that. And then JavaScript allows you to throw in some extra elements of design. It allows you to throw in some animations. It allows you to do all that sort of thing. So there's lots. So by combining these 3 languages together, what you can then build is a really cool kind of website. So what we were thinking of doing over the next few weeks is, since that we want to have some sort of JavaScript element to what we're doing, it would be a good idea to kind of focus on putting some JavaScript into web design, so that way we can see kind of like how where it's really is used sort of it's most often where it's most often used. So whilst everybody's settling in, I thought I'd just give an example of a type of website that's relatively simple in terms of design, but still comprises of lots and lots of different elements that kind of sort of brings everything together. So the website that we've chosen to kind of look at is the Visit Wales website, and this is one of their pages. So this is their destinations page, and you can see that the Visit Wales website is actually, it's got menus that go along the top of the screen. It's got sort of different sort of links that take you through to different pages. It's got, lots and lots of other different elements to it. It's got pictures. Okay, you can see that things are positioned in different ways. Now, this, of course, is quite an advanced sort of level of web design. So I'm not expecting us to be able to get, to this kind of stage. If you can, then that's, that's really amazing. But I'm not don't feel like you have to get something that looks kind of like this. Okay, but what we'll be doing is we'll be building up through different sessions. We'll be adding different elements as we go. So we're going to start off for this week, and maybe next week we'll focus on HTML, and then we'll start looking a little bit at CSS, and then eventually we'll go through some JavaScript. Lost internet, but yeah, that's fine. So I'll just recap on what I said a second ago. This is an example of a website. Now, I'm not expecting anybody to get a website that kind of looks like this. Okay, as I said, if you can, then that's really, really, that's fab. But if you are, if you can't, it's entirely up to you how you design your website at the end of the day. But this is just an example of a website that kind of brings everything together, and it's the type of thing that you could end up producing by the end of these sessions. Okay, so it's got lots of different elements to it. It's got links to different pages. It's got different pictures. It's got different layouts in different sections, and it's got lots of different kind of bits and bobs going on. It's got a header section with a navigation bar. It has a footer which has got more links in it. Okay, so there are lots of different elements to it, and what we'll be doing over the next few weeks is we'll be building up our knowledge on website design by going through a bit of HTML. Then we'll be going through some CSS so that we can style the web pages a bit, and then we'll go through some JavaScript eventually, so that we can actually throw in quite a few sort of new elements and make our pages a bit more funky. Okay, so the plan for today is to go through some HTML stuff. Okay, we're just going to start with the basics. Again, I know a lot of you are already familiar with HTML, but our intention is to kind of build from the ground up, so to speak. So we're going to go through the basics, and then we'll work our way through things and get to the more advanced level stuff as the weeks go by. But this is kind of going to be like a similar project to what we did with CodePen. With GameFruit, okay, how we started something with GameFruit and then we kind of built up to the more advanced stuff. So we're going to be doing kind of like a similar thing with this now. We're going to start with basic web design, and then we're going to work our way up to doing a kind of a more advanced page. So I've got an example of my screen now of something that we are going to try and achieve today, and this is just a basic bit of HTML. Okay, I've got different headings, I've got a small picture. It is meant to look like that, by the way, that picture. It's not missing anything. That is the picture. And I've got, if we've got time, we'll look at lists, and we'll be splitting things up into different sections. Okay, so we're going to be taking our time with it. We're going to be working through it slowly. And if you do have any questions at any point, or if I'm going too fast, remember to just pop them in the chat, or come onto the voice channel, and we'll go through that. Okay, and we'll slow it down a little bit. The website, so what I'm going to be using is a website called CodePen, which I'll link to you in the chat now. Okay, so I'm going to be using a website called CodePen, which is a free website, okay, that lets you design different web pages and in using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you can build up your web page on there. If you want to save your projects, then you do have to make an online account, okay. Alternatively, if you do have your own, maybe you have your own server set up at home and you can sort of run your websites from home, you can use Visual Studio Code, okay, as an alternative. So you're welcome to use Visual Studio Code if that's something that you would prefer. Okay, we're not sort of tying you to use any particular platform. It's entirely up to you what you go for. So Visual Studio Code, or as Andrew's put there, you can use Notepad++, or you can use CodePen. I'm going to stick to CodePen today because it's a free platform that everybody can use. But if you do decide that you would rather use an alternative, that's absolutely fine. Okay, you're not as Andrew said there, what best suits your needs is absolutely fine. So we'll make a start now on our first on the first stages of our website. Okay, so when you load up the CodePen website, yours might look a tad different to mine. Okay, because I'm signed in, but on the left of the screen you should see a button that says create or something like that, and what you want to create is a new pen. Okay, so just click on sort of create pen or whatever it says on your screen. Just click on create pen. It's definitely in the left of the screen though. And if you click on that, you'll get taken to this page, okay, where you will have 3 different boxes where you can type in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and these are all different sort of sections which we'll be using over the next few weeks. Okay, as we're just going to be using the HTML page today, okay, code window, I'm just going to close the CSS and JavaScript window so that we've just got one big sort of HTML section. Now, what you will have, this is our coding window, so this is where we're going to be typing everything. You can save your CodePen project using the save button, and you can also rename it as well. So if you click on the pencil, you can rename it. So I'll call this one TechnoCamps. We'll call it TechnoCamps Project 1 or something like that. Okay, so you can rename it and then you can save it, and then that will appear then in your CodePen account. Okay. The big white section that's just appeared at the bottom is going to be where our website appears. So as we're typing out code, as we're typing out HTML, what we type will then appear in that big white space at the bottom. Okay, and that's where we're going to that's the main kind of preview page in a way for how your website's going to look. So we're going to start looking now at HTML. We're going to go through it quite slowly just to make sure that everybody kind of gets the hang of it, because again, this is another new language that you're learning now. So it's really impressive what you've all been doing over the last few weeks, because you've been doing all sorts of different languages. Okay, you've done a little bit of block-based programming, you've done some Python, you've done a little bit of JavaScript in Minecraft, and now we're going to be looking at HTML, CSS, and JavaScript combined. So you've learned so many new languages already. It's really, really impressive. Okay, so you should all be really proud of yourselves of learning all these new languages. There's quite a lot to learn with HTML and CSS. Okay, they don't follow the usual conventions that you would see with programming languages like JavaScript and Python. So that meaning you don't typically come across things like if statements, looping, and that sort of thing. Okay, they're slightly different languages in that sense. So we're going to go through them. Like I said, we'll go through them together. Any questions at any point, pop them in the chat, and we will we'll go through them. Okay. So when you're programming with HTML, you use something known as tags. Okay, And tags are things that are enclosed in what we call angled brackets. Okay, so if you look at your keyboards, most likely where you would put a comma or a full stop, there's like two little kind of, they look like almost like arrows. Okay, so they kind of look like that. I'll see if I can actually zoom in a bit. Let's see. Hopefully I can zoom in. There we go. So they kind of look like arrows. Okay, and those are angled brackets. Okay, so Andrew's just put them in the chat now for you to see. And these, what we put inside of these is known as a tag. So a tag, everything in HTML kind of evolves around these tags. Okay, this idea of a tag. And we use those to kind of tell our browser what we're going to be, what we want to, have displayed on the screen and in what format. Okay, so we're going to use a series of tags. Now, to start off, hopefully you can all see that. If it is a bit too small, I'll zoom in again so that you can see it a bit better. Yes. Yeah. Is it a bit small?
Yeah. Can you just zoom in a bit? Much better.
Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Cool. There we go. Is that better? Yeah.
Yeah, that's better.
Cool. That's fine. No worries. So. What we've got, as I said, what we have are a series of tags, okay? And we're going to be using these tags to sort of build up our website, and what's inside of the tags tells us what's going to go on the website. So, exactly it is, yes. So the two angled braces that you've got there, that's the HTML logo, okay? So that, yeah, you're absolutely right. So that is why we have, that's why the HTML logo is those brackets, because that's essentially how HTML works. So pretty much every HTML document will always start with HTML, okay? So we say angled bracket and we type HTML. Now, when you are building up a website, okay, what you will have is kind of like very much like we've discussed before, this idea of nesting. Okay, so you know how we were nesting loops before? It's a similar concept in HTML. Okay, so what do we? Oh yeah, wrong date. Not good. Yeah, we're definitely teaching in the past, it'd seem. So what we've got, like I said, are these kind of like this idea of nesting. And what happens is when you have a separate section, everything that's inside of that section will be nested inside of the angled braces. Okay. So for an example now, I've typed in HTML and you can see that my cursor has now indented so that it is inside of the HTML. Okay, so you could probably see that it's now indented the code so that I am now inside of the HTML's kind of angled brackets. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to include is something called the head. Okay, now the head this isn't something that necessarily appears within the document. Okay, this is just some information for, in a way, this is kind of like information for the browser to interpret about your document. Okay, so this is information so the browser will kind of read this and it will understand kind of that you've got a HTML document and it's using certain bits of information. So the head is the starting point of your HTML document, and I'm going to put two things inside of the head. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to include is a tag called meta. And I'm going to include something known as char set and that's going to be equal to, whoops, there we are, UTF-8, and then I'm going to close that tag. Does anybody know what I mean by that? Does anybody know what I mean by charset UTF-8? Don't worry if you don't know. It might not be something that you've come across before, so it's okay if you haven't. The language, yeah. So you're right. You're right. There is. So it's kind of, in a way, it's similar. You could think of it as kind of like the language or the library of letters, numbers, and special characters sort of thing that we're using. Okay, so UTF-8 is one of the most common ones that is used because it contains all of, the different special characters and all that sort of thing. It's part of that kind of character set. Okay, so it's part of that kind of library of numbers, letters, and that sort of thing. So our website is going to be written in that character set. Okay. The next tag I'm going to include is then something known as title. Now, as the name suggests, okay, this is going to be the title of our page. Okay, this is going to be the title of the web page, not the whole website. Okay, it's the title of this specific page. So when you move on to, so say now you were designing multiple different pages and you had, say, a page for, I don't know, let's just say you had a page for, like in the Visit Wales website, they've got a home page, they've got a destinations page, okay, they've got all that sort of thing. The title is the title of the specific page, okay? So I'm going to call, well, for this instance, I'll call this one page 1. But again, you can call it whatever you like. And this most tags, okay, within a HTML document, okay, will have a closing tag. Okay, so sometimes you'll find, like, for an example, with this meta tag here, it's just kind of one long tag. It doesn't need a closing tag. But most of the pages need a closing tag. So most of the tags, need a closing tag. So in this case, to close the tag, to say that's the end of the tag, we're going to just write we're going to say angled brace / and then title. Okay. So to close a tag, all you need to do is you need to just write exactly the same thing as the opening tag, but you put a / in front of it. Okay, and that's then saying that that tag is then closed. Okay, and that's the end of that tag. Now, like I said, some tags don't need it. So, for example, the meta tag you can just see as one standalone tag. It doesn't need a closing tag. But the vast majority of tags will also need a closing tag to tell the web browser this is the end of that tag. Now, modern browsers like Chrome and things like that can sometimes deal with the fact that you've not closed a tag, and it will still recognize when a tag is closed. But older browsers, especially, will need you to close tags, so that way you can, so that you can say, right, that's the end of the tag, and then it's sort of finished. Okay, and it's good practice to do it as well, because it makes your web page structure look a lot cleaner. Now, that's all we're going to include in the head section. So now that I've reached the end of the head section, I just need to say /head. Okay, and that's now telling the web browser that I have now finished the section on head. Okay, and you can see that I have not got anything appearing in my preview, and that's because everything that's included within the head section is purely everything that's included in the head section is purely information for the web browser, so that it knows a little bit more about your website. Okay, so everything that's in the head section isn't going to appear on your actual website. If you're designing something in, say, VS Code, for an example, okay, and you load up your web page and you have a look in the tab So if you've got it open as a tab on your web browser, what you will see is that the name of the tab is actually the title. Whoops. It's the title of your web page. So if I built this up now in VS Code and I'd run a server and I'd had my website put up onto a web browser, the tab would be called page 1. Okay, so it's the title of that specific page. So that's all we're going to include inside of the head. What we need to do now is we need to actually move on to the main body of content. Okay, so we're going to call this section body, and what comes inside of the body tag is everything that's sort of to be contained on the actual website. Okay, so everything that's inside of the body tag comes on the actual website. Okay, so it gets its name, of course, from being the main body of content. So everything that we find in here is actually going to be displayed on the website. Now, this again is split up, can be split up into different sections, and the first part that we need to know about is something called the header. So again, this is nested. Okay, so it's not part of the head, but it's separate to the head section, but it's nested. It'll have its own set of things that's a part of it, so we'll need to indent the code again. And what we're going to have is something called a header. Okay, now the header tag defines everything that comes at the top of your web page. Okay, so it's good practice to have a header section, because this is telling the web browser that everything that's inside of those two tags is going to come on top of my web page. Now, this is where you will often put things like your hyperlinks to other pages. So going back to that Visit Wales website, you can see that we've got different sections. We've got Inspire Me, places to stay, things to do, all of that sort of thing is included in the header of the website. Okay, and this is what's going to go in. Something similar like this will eventually become part of our header, okay, on our website. So all we're going to put in the header for now is a title for our web page. Okay, now when you are titling sections inside of a HTML document, there are lots and lots of different types of heading that you can use, and we'll have a look at those more as we work our way through our website. Okay, but the first type of heading, the biggest type of heading, okay, is something called a H1, and a H1 is the biggest type of heading that you can have on a website. Okay, it's the largest. It means that this is kind of like your main heading. Okay, and what I'll do, I'm going to give a title to my website. So I'm going to say this is a very big heading. Okay, so you can see that that's absolutely gigantic on my website, and I'm going to close that with a /h1 tag to say that is now the end of my very big heading. Okay, so H1 tags are basically signifying that we have a really big heading, and that it's and that's that. Okay, now for the time being, this is all I'm going to include in the header section. So I'm going to then go /header to say that I've now reached the end of the header. Now eventually, of course, what we'll do is we'll start adding menus to our header so that we can sort of navigate between pages. But for the time being, just to keep it simple so that we can kind of get up to speed with how HTML works, I'm just going to put a title, okay, inside of my heading. So we've reached the end of the header section, so that means that we're now finished with the top of the page. Okay. And what we'll do is, so that we can remind ourselves to actually finish, to close the body, so that we know that so that we don't forget to do it, we'll go down, we'll move from the header down to a couple of spaces, and we'll just say /body. Okay, so that's just reminding us that we've now closed the body. We haven't finished putting stuff into the body yet, but just to make sure that we don't forget, we can put that there, so that way we remember to actually officially close it. Okay, so we're now finished with the header section, so we've finished with the top of the page. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to move on to including the main content of the web page. Okay, and that is done using the main tag. So everything now that's inside of the main tag, still part of the body. Okay, so you can see that we're still nested inside of those inside of the body tag, but we're now moving on to the main section. So if we just summarize where we're up to so far, just to make sure that everybody is so Trace, you're right. Yeah, so on VS Code, if you do type in that, it can just auto complete the whole section for you, so you don't have to worry about it. That's kind of the beauty of VS Code in a way, is that it has a lot of kind of predefined stuff for you, so that way you don't have to necessarily remember to say close a tag, because it will automatically have put that close tag there for you. Okay, so VS Code is, if you can use VS Code, I 100% recommend it, because it is really simple. It's really helpful. Okay, but just to some.
Dan has forgotten to add something on purpose, I believe. See if you all spotted it. Anyone see what he's missing? Doc type would be one, but just as the
Doc type, yeah.
if you scroll down a bit further down,
Yep.
maybe you've added it previously, but I don't think it is there.
No.
First tag used.
Absolutely, it is. Well done. Yeah, so I haven't yet included the closing tag for HTML. Absolutely. So before the body tag, because of course the body is nested inside of the HTML tag, we want to close our HTML. Sometimes it will try and auto indent things, but just kind of push it back yourself. We want to close that HTML tag. Okay, so you can do that like that. So if we just summarize where we're up to so far, just to make sure that we're all in the same place. Okay, we've started off with the HTML. Again, I haven't put a doc type, but that's mainly because CodePen isn't really too bothered if if you include a doc type or not. But yes, Trace, you're absolutely right. Doc type can go at the top, so I'll add that in actually, just so that everybody can see. There we go. So we've got doc type. Okay. So that's just saying that we have that we've started off our HTML document. Of course, it's flashing up all sorts of warnings, but just ignore those for now. So we've got the doc type, then we've got our starting HTML tag, okay, which says that we have now started our HTML document. Then we have our head, which is content that doesn't go necessarily onto the website. It's just telling the web browser a little bit of information about our website. And within that, we have our character set, which is our kind of, as Trace said, our kind of like our language. Okay, it's the library of characters and things like that that we're using for the website. We then have the title, which is the title of the page that we are working on. And then we have closed our head then using the /head tag. We've then gone down to the body, which is the main body of content for the web page. And we've got a header, which is what goes on top of the web page. And we've started off our web page with a very big heading using a H1 tag, which is the largest type of heading that you can include on your website. I've also closed off my body and HTML tags so that I can so that I don't forget to do it. Okay, and now we're moving on to the main tag, which is the main body of the website. Okay.
Hi Dan, I was going to cut across quickly.
Yeah.
Did the H1 tags on our website?
Mm-hmm.
You should only have one H1
Yeah.
And for SEO, so when you use Google, they use something called SEO, which is search engine optimization. If you have multiple H1 tags, it will add value for your web page, but you won't appear on Google. If you have one, Google can see that this is the title of the web page, and that's where you have the other H2 and H3 tags to identify different areas of the web page with paragraphs and text and images in between.
Yeah.
Just so that people know.
That's a really good point, actually, Andrew. Because of course one of the sort of key things that you need to have on your, one of the key things to consider, I should say, when you're building up your website, is to have in the back of your head this idea of search engine optimization, okay, SEO, because that is that allows your website to get bumped up in search results on things like Google, Bing, etc., etc. So that way, when you as your people search for your website or that sort of thing, you will find that you are further and further up in the search results list, and more people are likely to click on your website. Who uses Bing? Chris doesn't use Bing. I personally don't use Bing. I'm a Google person. I'd imagine a lot of us are Google people. Yeah, I'm more of a Google person, Google Chrome. Yeah, so we'll have a look now then at our main section. Now, you are able to split up your. I'm just going to remove doc type temporarily, just so that that red triangle, red exclamation point disappears. So what I'm going to what you can do is you can actually split up different sections of your website so that you can divide content up, okay, and you can use different tags to do this, okay. So you can use something called a section tag, you can use something called an article tag, okay. It depends on what type of document you're writing, okay, or what sort of website you're building. From this website, I'm just going to be using the section tag. So I'm going to go section, okay. And what you can do is you can actually give sections specific names through something known as a class, and you can name things using something called a class. We're not going to look at classes today, okay. That'll probably be something that we look at next week or when we start using CSS a bit more. Okay, but a class, sorry, is a way that you can label a section so that you can select it in order to edit it using things like CSS later on. Okay, but we're not going to look at classes today. That's something that we'll do a bit later on. So for now, I'm just going to have a section tag, and I'm going to nest content inside of that section so that we can kind of build up a bit of a structure to our website. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to include a title for my section, and I'm going to, of course, as Andrew said, we only should have one H1 tag per page, so that search engine optimization picks us up a bit better when people perform a Google search for our website. So instead of having another H1, I'm now going to use a slightly smaller heading, which is done using something called H2. Okay, so the H's, okay, the respective H's actually run from H1 all the way down to H6, okay, and and each one gets smaller and smaller in size. So Andrew's put here, when Dan talks about nesting, do we all understand the concept? So is everybody comfortable with the idea of what I mean by nesting? Because I can go through it again if people aren't sure. Yeah, so as Andrew said, it becomes much more important when we're building up a website and we're styling things using CSS, etc. Having some nesting, or this idea of nesting is really, really important. Um, so, is everybody comfortable with the idea of what I mean by nesting? I'll go through it again just in case some people aren't too sure. But ultimately, what nesting means, so if we take this main section as an example, okay, you can see that the way that I'm structuring things, it kind of is like layers. So you can see that at the top of the layer is the main, okay. Inside of the main, I have a section, and inside of the section, I have a H2, okay. So as I am building up the website, I am layering or nesting things inside of each other. And this is represented through indentation. Okay, so you can see that the main is indented so many spaces, section is indented more, and the H2 is indented even further. So everything is layered and structured inside of each other. Okay, and it's important that we do this so that we remember what's part of each section. So it's like when we were doing looping, okay, we might have had, say, a loop inside of a loop inside of a loop, and the idea was that overall the two loops that were inside of the outer loop will run the specified number of times that the outer loop is meant to run. Then the loop inside of that will run a certain number of times, and the loop inside of that will run the number of times that its outer loop kind of wants it to run. So everything nests together to form kind of one sort of structure. Okay, I hope that makes sense. If anybody wants me to go through it again, just let me know. So I'm going to say H2. This is a smaller heading. Okay, so H2 is a slightly smaller heading, and again I'm going to close that using a closing H2 tag. And you can see in the preview section here that the H2 heading is much smaller than the H1 heading. Okay, so by doing that, we have now produced a slightly smaller heading, but that is going to talk about that heading is there to kind of start off the next section, okay, which is part of the main. So like in the Visit Wales website, okay, I'm not quite sure where their H1 would be in this instance, but let's just say welcome to mountain biking in Wales is their H1, okay, and then wonderful castles to explore in Wales is their H2, okay. We could look at it like that. That is an example of a use of a larger heading to kind of help with search engine optimization, and then we have a slightly smaller heading to split up the sections, okay. So that is now the H2 completed. And I want to now include an image in my website. And the image tag is one of those unique examples that doesn't necessarily need a closing tag. Now, if you're using something like VS Code, you're welcome to include any image, okay? Or if you have a web link to an image that you know works, you're free to use it. Otherwise, you're welcome to use the placeholder image that I have selected for this demo. Okay. Now, the image tag is represented by the words img for image. And what you have to do is specify the source of that image, okay, so where that image comes from. Now, if you're using something like VS Code and you want to take an image that's, say, in your pictures folder on your PC, you would need to specify the file path, okay? So you would need to say that it's come from, say, documents, images, and then the name of the image, okay? If you're taking an image from a website, like I am, you can use, you would need to use this anyway, but you need to use src equals and then open and close quotes so that you can specify the source of the file. Now, I'm going to include a placeholder image, but again, the images that you choose are up to you. If you can find another placeholder image or a different image you'd like to use, that's absolutely fine. But I'm just going to type in the web address of the image that I have selected. So https / and then via.placeholder.
Or for all of us, we could copy that and paste.
Yeah, you could do that as well. But you can see that what I've got now is my CodePen website has gone to that web address. It's found the image and it's now popped it into the website. Okay, and that's all the image is. It just says 150 by 150. Okay. There are lots of placeholder images out there, so if you want to choose one for the purposes of your website, you can do. Okay. But you need to specify the image's source, and an image tag doesn't need a closing tag because it's already got the source contained within it as an attribute. So this is an attribute of the source section. Okay, this source section is an attribute of the image tag. So it's saying that this is where the image needs to come from. Okay. So you're free to choose any image from the internet that you can find that you'd like to have on your website, but I've just thrown in a bit of a placeholder for now. Okay. So you will find that some tags, so like the meta tag, it has the char set attributes. So some tags have got attributes associated with them, which means that they have a little bit more information that's a part of them to help your browser figure out what it needs to do with that specific tag. Okay, it's like a bit more information that you need to give so that it can work out what it needs to do. So like the meta tag has got the attribute char set, so that it knows that it needs to use the UTF-8 library. The image tag has got the source attribute, so that it knows where to go and get the image from. Okay, it's just giving it a little bit more information, so that it knows what to do with it. But you don't need to close the image tag, because it will know that it's reached the end of the tag once it's got the image from the specified location. Okay. So I hope everybody's with me so far. We've already covered quite a lot already, so if anybody does have any questions, remember to post them in the chat or post some screenshots in the chat as well of anything that you've been working on. What I'll do, I'll just pause here for a second because I know a lot of you might have wanted to have gone off to find some images of your own to put on your website. So I'll just give everybody a bit of time to do that now, and then we'll carry on in a couple of minutes once everybody's got kind of caught up. And this is a chance as well, if any of you do have any questions, to put them in the chat.
Would be a good idea, from our perspective, for you to build a website around the topic of Wales, so maybe heritage sites, something like that. That would be quite cool. And then we can add all these different elements into it. We'd use this website as our inspiration and build our own, which would be nice, I think.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good idea, because there is so much you could talk about in the context of Wales. Okay, there's so many different things that you can do in Wales, as we all know, and it would be a good opportunity for you to kind of build something to talk about the areas that we all live in, so to speak. So if you'd like to do something on Wales, it doesn't necessarily have to be like visit Wales specifically. Okay, it might be that, for an example, you want to do a website on, say, a particular castle in Wales, or you might want to do a bit of information on a specific area. Okay, or you could do something on the history of Wales, for an example.
And you
Yeah, exactly. So 100% agree. It's good to have, as Andrew, as Andrew was saying, it's good to have kind of like a project to actually be working on. So that way, what I'm doing with you today is mainly kind of just like a demo or a tutorial, um, that help so that you can understand how HTML works. And again, this will be kind of how I present sort of things to you, okay, as we go through the coming weeks. This will kind of be how my website will look. But the way that you structure your websites and the what content that you put in them is entirely up to you, and you don't have to follow what I'm doing kind of word for word. So what I'm doing, I'm just teaching you kind of how about the different things, so about headings, about how to start off a document, etc., etc. But what you'd include in your websites is entirely up to you, and the way that you structure them is completely down to how it's up to you. Okay, so don't feel like you've got to follow what I'm doing. If that's not to say if you want to have your website structured like mine, that's absolutely fine as well. But if you want to put your own kind of spin on it and kind of design it to be a bit more kind of how you want it, then go for it. Okay, it's completely down to you how you would like to how you'd like to structure it. Okay, so what we'll do now is I hope everybody's had a chance to kind of find an image or something like that. What we'll do now is we'll just go through a few more of the different things that you can do within HTML. Okay, so if you wanted to write an extended section, okay, so say you had your heading and then you want to start talking about a particular topic, okay, you can do that using a paragraph tag, okay, which is represented as a p tag. So you've got your p tag, and it's within the p tag that you can start writing more extended pieces. Okay, so instead of just writing a title or a heading and then kind of moving on, you can now write sentences or paragraphs that you can include within your website. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just say you can write more extended pieces using the p tag. Okay, and again, this will need to be closed, so you will need to put a /p to kind of close the tag. Okay, and you can see now that I've got a little bit of text that's now appeared underneath the image, okay, in the form of a sentence. Now, don't worry about the styling of it currently, because you can style it and change it, as much as you like when we get around to CSS. Okay. So as Andrew has put in the chat earlier, when we're styling our website, we use CSS, and so for now you're just going to have a default kind of font. You're going to have a default layout. Everything's going to appear one thing under the other. But when we get round to using CSS, you can start floating things to different parts of the page. You can start centering things. You can change the color of things. You can reposition things. You can make everything look a lot more fancy. Okay, but what you will find without CSS, HTML merely offers a basic structure to your website, which is why it works really well with CSS, so that you can not only build up a structure to your website, but you can then also style it as well. Okay, so that's why it works really well with CSS, and then eventually JavaScript, because you can do all sorts of funky things with JavaScript to kind of add even more to your website. Okay, so if I wanted to write another sentence, I could just put in another p tag and say this is another bit of text. Okay, and then close that with another p tag. There we go. and then you can see that that's now appeared there as well. Okay, so everything that kind of comes between the p tags is what's going to be structured on the, ignore the unexpected character. Okay, it's just CodePen trying to catch up with what I'm doing. So what you've got within the, between the two p tags is its content. Okay, and that's it says a p tag represents a paragraph, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a whole paragraph. It can be just a regular sentence. Okay, so let's just say that we have written a little bit of text and then we want to start discussing something else. So let's just say this was a bit of a, that we've got our H2, which is a bit of an introduction to a section. We've then got an image that kind of represents what's going on in the section, and then we've written a little bit about the section, but then we want to break up the content of that section a bit further. We can use something known as a H3 tag. Okay, so you can say H3, which is an even smaller heading. So this is an even smaller heading. Okay, and the purpose of the H3 tag is to kind of make your kind of split up the content of your different section a bit more. So you can see that we're part of a section and we've got a small heading, and then we've got a paragraph to kind of maybe as a bit of an intro to the heading, and we're kind of to the section, and we're saying, you know, this is an intro to our heading, and then we want to start discussing the main point of that section. We can do that then using H3. Okay, so to think of an example, if we look back at the Visit Wales website, okay, let's see if we can find an example on here. Let's have a look. So let's go to must do on angle C. Okay, so it could be something as simple as, there's your H1, okay, must do on angle C, and then it could be that you've got, say, angle C coastal path is like your H2, and although they haven't quite got an equivalent of a H3 here, it could be that if they were talking about a specific footpath, they might have a H3, say just before this paragraph, that says name of a footpath and then talks about that specific footpath. So essentially it's kind of breaks up your section even more. So you use the different levels of heading to break up your section. Okay, and then once you've done that, you can then put another paragraph, a paragraph underneath that says this talks about another topic. Okay, so in a way what we're doing here is we're breaking up our website so that we have a little bit more of a structure. So you can see that I've started with a very big heading. I've then gone to a smaller heading to talk about a separate topic. I might have put a picture in about that topic. I've written a little bit about the topic, and then I've said, right, so this is the first bit of information about this topic, and then I've started writing about it. Okay, so using the different layers of heading, you can break up the content of your website so that you can structure it a bit clearer so that you can talk about different things. Okay, so hopefully that's made sense so far and that everybody is with me on that so far. Remember to post some questions in the chat if you need any help. But that's kind of the idea so far. Okay, is that we've got these separate headings that break up the content of our website. So what we'll do now is we'll talk about the idea of lists. Now, lists in websites can be used for in a number of different ways. I'm going to be using a list today to represent just a normal bullet pointed list. However, when we start looking a little bit more at navigating between pages, what we can do is we can look at what's known as a Nav Bar, and a Nav Bar will be kind of like a menu. So kind of like how on the Visit Wales page here we've got Inspire Me, places to stay, things to do, destinations, and info. This is the Visit Wales's Nav Bar. Okay, so this is how we would navigate between pages on the Visit Wales website. Okay, and this is a nav bar, and this would have most likely been produced using a list. Okay, so this would have been produced using a list that's been restructured and re kind of laid out so that things are positioned next to each other, and when you click on them they take you to a different page. And this is kind of how we will be structuring our lists eventually on our websites. Okay, so for today, though, we're not going to be looking at a nav bar. We're going to be looking at just producing a regular list. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a tag called UL. Okay, now, does anybody know what UL stands for? Again, don't worry if you're not sure, because I know a lot of you are new to this, but if you do, so Andrew's put it in the chat there, UL. Does anybody know what UL stands for? Not quite underline. No, so Andrew's put the alternative as well. It's not quite underline. So there's UL and there's OL.
What might help here is have a think. It's a list, but have a think in Word when you're creating a list. What type of lists can you have? That might help.
Yeah, spot on, Trace. You've got it. Well done. So you've got an ordered list and an unordered list. So of course UL would be an unordered list and an OL would be an ordered list. And so say you had numbers, okay, so if you were numbering different points, you could represent that using an OL because you would have things in, say, set order. But if you're making something like a nav bar, or if you're just making a regular bullet pointed list where there is no sort of order to what, you know, the points, an order to the points, you can use what's known as a UL. And within a UL, okay, we are nesting again. We need to list items, okay? So that is represented using the LI tag. So UL, unordered list, and LI is a list point. So this is a specific starting point to, this is a specific item within the list. So I'll just call mine point 1, okay? And I'm going to close that, whoops, using an LI. And then if I want to make another point, I would go LI point 2, and I will close that, okay? And then I'll do another one, so LI and point 3, okay? And what that's doing is it's making a bullet pointed list, as you can see, okay? Point 1, point 2, and point 3, and they're all represented using LIs. And I'm also going to close my list to say that that's now the end of my list by saying /UL. Again, notice how the browser did recognize the fact that even before I'd closed the list, I had it already recognized that the list was there even before I'd finished put the closing tag in there. That is a feature of modern browsers. It can identify when a browser is, when a list or when something is meant to have closed, but it's good practice to put that closing tag there to help you split up the content of your page as well, okay? Andrew has put an example in the chat as well.
What might be useful is just create the same list now, but using the OL so we can see the difference in the background.
So we can do, so we'll
just copy and paste that and just change them to OLs, and you should be able to see the difference.
So if we copy and paste, so just sometimes it will try and reposition things, so just bear that in mind. Now say OL, you can see that it has fixed that by default, and you can see that we've now got a numbered list. Okay, it's put things in order, so instead of just having bullet points, we've now got an actual structure. Okay, I'll just split these up so that you can see it a bit better. Oops, there we go. So you've got a UL and you've got an OL, okay, and you can see the difference in them there. So the point of that is it ultimately all comes down to what type of list you need to produce and what points you're trying to put across. Okay, so but both contain these list item tags which you need in order to tell the web browser this is a point that I'm trying to make within the list. Okay, this is an item that's part of the list. And again, it's just remember to close that list off as well using the closing tag, because you don't want to accidentally forget to do that, especially when we're, as we were saying, using older browsers, because they won't understand what you're trying to do unless you close the tag. Okay. So those are lists, and eventually when we get around to using CSS, you can actually change the style of the bullet point. Okay, you don't have to just stick to a little circle or the number 1 specifically. Okay, you can actually change the styling. You could do all kinds of things using CSS, but the default is, in the case of Chrome at least, bullet points, and that's one thing to kind of mention as well, actually. Is a lot of browsers look at things in different ways. Okay, so what you see on if you build up a website using something like VS Code and you write it all up and it looks, really good, and you've got the font perfect and everything looks good, you might then launch that in Chrome, for example, and it looks spot on. Okay, it's exactly how you had it planned. But you might then try and open it in like Safari if you've got a Mac, or you might open it in Edge, okay, or Internet Explorer, and it will look completely different. Okay, well, maybe not completely different, but you will notice subtle differences. So maybe the font will look different. Maybe how bold the font looks in a heading, for an example, might look slightly different. So different browsers read things in different ways. And interpret things differently. So it's important that when you're developing a website, try and use as many different browsers as possible, and try and run things as well on different devices. So try and run things on mobile phones, on tablets, okay? Because when it comes to actually viewing that website, you might find that when you launch it on a mobile phone, the font is so tiny that you can't read it, even when you zoom in. So you need to bear in mind that you need to trial where you run your website in different places, so that you can make sure that it looks that it's appropriate across multiple different devices. Okay, and also to make sure that different web browsers don't kind of mess up your structure or your text or something like that, to a point where the website isn't something that you're happy with. So the changes that you see won't be massive between browsers, but there are sometimes subtle differences that you'll need to bear in mind.
There are ways to solve the browser differences, but I don't think we'll get into that through technical issues in these workshops. I think that, just thinking about it,
Mm-hmm.
we will cover the aspect where the mobile looks different. We'll cover how to do that, and we'll do the CSS styling.
Yes.
When mobile screen and everything looks tiny, there are ways around it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll cover that when we do the CSS styling.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a special I don't really want to call it a tag in CSS, because we don't want to confuse matters. HTML uses tags. We'll say CSS uses curly brackets, okay? And there's a special type of curly bracket, or a special type of CSS bit of code, okay, that you can use, that allows you to have your website adapt itself when it recognizes that it is on a mobile phone. Okay, so when I was doing my first year in Bangor University, I had a module that was about web design. Okay, that's what's enabling me to kind of talk to you about it today. because I learned this stuff at, during my first year at university. Okay, and one of the things you can do with CSS is you can have a special bit of code that allows your website to recognize when it's being run on a mobile phone, or on a smaller screen, I should say, rather than a mobile phone. Okay, and one thing to kind of keep in mind is that there's a lot of talk, okay, about this idea of what's known as a mobile first design. And what I mean by that is a lot of web developers will design a a website with a mobile phone in mind to begin with. Okay, so from the offset, they will think about mobile phone. And the reason being is because the vast majority of us today access websites on our mobile phones. So the days of there being separate websites for mobile to web browser, okay, or to PC, have pretty much gone now. And the vast majority of people and companies and things like that now have websites that are designed to begin with to work on a mobile phone, because that is where most people will now do things. If you're doing something like, say, online shopping, for an example, okay, if there's not an app for it already, you can still do the online shopping using the company's website on your mobile phone. It's a lot of companies are now looking at designing websites to being compatible on a mobile phone before they even think about putting it on a web browser, because on a PC, because if something can fit onto the screen of a mobile phone, it can definitely fit onto the screen of your PC or laptop. So you need to make it as accessible as possible across all of your devices. Okay, so it's just one thing to bear in mind. I'm not expecting you to kind of know the ins and outs of this sort of thing now, but it's just something to consider when we're going through this. Is try and think, is this going to be something that looks like I'll be able to read it on my mobile phone or click on it on a mobile phone? Because you've got to think, when obviously on my screen now, these bullet pointed lists look really big, okay? But if I just quickly zoom out, you can see that actually they're really small. And if I had that on my mobile phone screen, it might be quite hard for me to tap it without accidentally hitting another menu, especially if they're really close together. So it's just something to consider as we're kind of going through things, that having a design for your mobile phone is equally as important as what it is to being run on your PC. Okay, it's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so we've got our lists, we've got our structure. Okay, everything is looking quite good, and remember, always have closing tags. But we also, you may have now realized, reached a point where we might have had enough kind of information on our website for today. So we need to make sure that we start closing up all of our sections. Now, so far, we've got closing tags for our body, which is, of course, the main body of our website. It's main content. And we've also got a section for our HTML. Okay, a closing tag for our HTML, which signifies the end of our HTML page. Now, what we might want to do, what we also, need to do is close off our section, okay, and our main, because we've now got our main body of content and our section, okay. So I'm going to go back one space so that everything is in line, and I'm going to say /section. To say that is now the end of my section, and I'm going to put in another closing tag that says /main to say that I've also closed off the main body of content. And you can see that they are all nested. Everything here, is nested inside of each other, okay, and split up into sections. So the main signifies the main body of content. Now, we won't do it this week, but we will have a look eventually as well at footers. So again, going back to the Visit Wales website, I scroll down to the bottom here. This is a footer. Okay, what we have along the bottom of the page here is a footer. And this contains maybe some additional information, some additional links, etc. to different pages. But it kind of summarizes that we've reached kind of like, that's the bottom part of the page. Okay, but we'll go through footers again. Okay, we'll go through footers next week. But let's just say, for an example, that we want to include something else on our web page. Let's just say, for an example, that, okay, we've reached the end of our section, but we also want something to come after the section. Well, we can do that by throwing in another section. So we could say section, okay, and then we could say, if I just put in a paragraph, this is a new section. Okay, so we can now say, as you can see, this is a new section. Okay, and you can see that this is quite a bad start to the new section because I've not put in any sort of heading to split it up. So let's just say I put in another H2, so this is a new heading. Okay, and I've got a new section now, you can see, with a new heading, and I will close that bit up as well. So I will say /section, okay, and that will then close up this section. So you can see that I've got one section which I've labeled and I've given sort of all of the information to, and then here I have another new section. So there is no limit to the number of sections that you include, okay, and like I said earlier, you can also include something called an article, which is again similar to a section, except this time it's in the context of an article. So if you were writing maybe up a journal or a newspaper article or something like that, or your page was like a news page, you might want it split up into separate articles. So you could have a section called an article, for an example. Okay, and then again we would close that up using /article. It's sort of up to you what you use. Okay, I'm sorry that CodePen keeps pushing me back up to the top of the website. But that is another new section, okay, but it's just called an article as opposed to a section. Now, a lot of you might be wondering how we differentiate between sections. So if we wanted to, for an example, change this section to being in green, and we wanted this section to being in blue, how can we do that when they're both called section? And this is where the idea of classes comes in. Okay, now again, I won't talk about classes today because that's something that's used in conjunction with CSS. So we'll go through that probably maybe next week, if not the week after. Okay, we'll go through classes. But when we give something a class, it means that we have given it kind of like a name, so that we know exactly what we're talking about. I'll give an example just so that you can see what it looks like, but again, you don't need to worry about doing this today. But in my first section, I'm going to say class equals, and I'll say that this is section 1, okay? And that's now given this section the name section 1, okay? If I go down to the second bit, I could say that this is section 2. And that is now breaking up, again, as well as now breaking up different sections of the website, I am also giving them a name so that the CSS is aware of what I'm referring to. You don't need to worry about this now, okay? This is just something that you that will come to eventually, okay? But it's a way of you differentiating between sections and giving them specific names so that you can style them using CSS. And the same principle also applies to things like H2s, okay, and P tags. If you wanted to give them their own class, you can do that, okay? There is no limit to what can have a class, but just bear in mind that you will need to give them meaningful names and don't overuse classes, okay? Because you don't necessarily need to give every single thing a class name, because you can select specific things from within a class. I know that sounds confusing, but we will come to it and you will see what I mean when we start talking about CSS, okay? Now, generally, that is pretty much all I wanted to cover with you today in terms of HTML. But there are a few more things I want to go through with you before, so we'll cover those now. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask at this point about HTML tags? Okay, like I said, don't worry about classes and CSS and things like that now. We'll come to that in a couple of weeks. But in terms of HTML, does anybody have any questions that they want to ask so far, or any points that they would like to make about what we've covered?
Well, it would be nice as well if you could send your screenshots in so we can see what you've been developing during this session.
Mm-hmm.
Quite nice. And just maybe give us an idea of what kind of website you want to build over this project.
Yeah. So if you haven't got any ideas just yet, then of course, don't worry. But if there are any particular sort of things you would like to do, so kind of like in Game Fruit, when we were developing our games up in Game Fruit, you might realize, oh, I want to do that, but you're not sure how to do it. If you pop a suggestion into the chat, we will come back, or we will try our best to come back to you with an answer on how to do it. Okay, so just kind of feel free to post stuff in the Discord. Post screenshots of what you've been up to, okay, of your code or of your website screen. And like I said, as Andrew said, if you do have any suggestions or ideas that you would like to put forward, then let us know, and we will do our best to answer them. Okay. So.
When we come to styling as well, you will see that everything that we've done in HTML at the moment is boring on the web page, and hopefully everyone is agreeing with that. On a web page, I would stay on very long. But when you do the HTML or the CSS styling, you can almost change every aspect of the page, how it looks, and JavaScript will add in more specific elements as to how you want certain aspects of your page to look like.
Yeah.
Quite boring now, like a Word document with no styling, but in the next couple of weeks, the CSS will make it look like a website you want to stay on and investigate.
Yeah, so the Visit Wales website, for an example, okay, this would have started off as exactly how our website looks now. Okay, it's as Andrew said, it's quite a boring website. There's nothing fun about it. It's a generic font. It's all sort of in black and white, basically. There's no images, there's no color, there's no styling. It's just like a generic Word document. But this is how every website has to start out. Every website will start off looking quite boring. It will look very bland. But as you work your way through, and as you kind of start building up your website, and we get familiar with CSS, you will notice that your website can eventually look very similar to how Visit Wales's one does. Okay, because you just reposition where things look, and you will eventually end up with a nice kind of structure to your website. So what we'll do is we'll give a quick run through of the code again, and then I want to show you one quite cool aspect of Google Chrome, which I think you should. You don't have to become familiar with it. It's not something that you need to know when you're doing web design, but it certainly helps when you are designing a website and you want to preview it in a browser. It's a useful tool to kind of have with you, okay, so that you can actually see it. Hopefully, I can get it to work, but we'll get back to that in a second. So, just to kind of go through, what we've got so far. We've started off with our opening HTML tag so that we know that the browser is using HTML as a language to read the website. And we've then got our head tag, opening and closing tag, which contains information about the website that the browser needs to know. Okay, so we've specified the character set that we're using, which is which the common standard today is typically UTF-8, and UTF-8 is of course contains all of the special characters that we would use. It contains all the numbers, all the letters, all of the characters that we would use on a day-to-day basis, and all of the special characters are included within UTF-8. So it's a worthwhile library or character set to use. And then we have the title, which is the title of the page that we are working on. So as I said, if I was to launch this in a web browser, in the tab on the top of the screen here, it would say page 1, okay, because that's what I have titled my page. And then of course I've got my closing tag. The body is the main body of content. So this is everything that's going to be included and seen on the screen. Okay, so everything that's in head will be invisible. Okay, you're not going to be able to see it, but everything that's in body is going to be what's actually displayed on our web page. The header is what's going to go along the top of the page. Eventually this will contain like a nav bar so that we can navigate between pages, and it will also contain sort of like the main title of the web page, which, like Andrew said, there should only be one of. There should only be one H1 per page to help with search engine optimization, so that we can ensure that that our page is pushed as far up in Google or Bing as possible. Okay, and like I say, we will also have a nav bar in here eventually as well, so that we have links to different pages. The main section is then what's going to be the main body of content. So that's everything that comes after the header. So everything that comes after this point will appear on the web page. And the main section can be split up into different sections, okay, which can be given classes to differentiate them. But again, classes we'll come back to at a later date. It's good practice to give every section a heading. And again, you would use this using a H2 tag, because that's a slightly smaller heading, and it helps to split up the content of your page a bit better. We have used an image tag here, okay, and we have got the source of that image located in double quotes. In this case, I've used a web image, but you could also access images from your PC. If you are using something like VS Code, you can put the file path of the image in between the double quotes, and that will then access that image for you and display it on your web page. We've also made use of P tags, which are essentially like paragraphs. Okay, again, you can just write a sentence. It doesn't have to be a paragraph, but you use P tags in order to write certain bits of information into your web page. And if you wanted to split up the content of your web pages even more, you could use a H3 tag to kind of differentiate that content slightly further. We've also looked at lists. So we have unordered lists, which is represented by UL, and we have ordered lists, which are specified using OL. And you can see that the main difference is with a UL, what you've got are bullet points, and with an OL, which is an ordered list, you will have numbers, so that the list is in a particular order. And again, you would need to close every section off, and when you are using a closing tag, it looks identical to the opening tag, but there's a / in front of what you're closing. We've, of course, as well also looked at different types of sections that you can have on a website. So as well as having just a standard section, you can also have an article. And there are lots of other different types as well, and you're welcome to kind of Google around to see what other different sections you can include on your website. We've also, of course, closed everything off. And what this using closing tags, and what this proves is that we have got this idea of nesting, where certain things are part of certain sections. So if I was to split things up a bit more, you could see that this section is a part of main. This is all a part of main until we get to the closing tag, which specifies the end of this section. This section here is also part of main, okay, because it's nested inside of the main tag. And this article is also part of main because it's nested inside of the main tag. Main and header are both part of body, and body is everything that's on the website. So everything that you want on the website will be nested inside of the body tag, and everything that you want as part of a particular section will be nested inside of that section. Okay, so the idea of nesting is very, very important. And again, you can also have footers, which will then come at the end of the website. So, I hope that makes sense to anybody. Again, if anybody does have any questions, then let me know in the Discord. Okay, and Andrew and I will do our best to answer them. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go through a feature that is particularly useful in Google Chrome. Okay, I'm not sure how many of you use Google Chrome on a day-to-day basis. Some of you might use Mozilla or Edge. I'm not going to mention Internet Explorer, but some of you might use Mozilla or Edge. So if either of you do, then I would I believe there are equivalents on those browsers. But Google Chrome's one is especially useful for this. So if I head back over to the Visit Wales website, okay, and I right-click and I go to Inspect, okay, this brings up something known as the Element Inspector. Now, it looks quite intense, okay, there's a lot of information there, but that is because we are using, they have of course got quite an advanced website here which has a lot of different things going on it. Okay, so there's a lot going on this website, hence why there's an awful lot of information here. But what the Element Inspector does is it allows you to view sections. See if I can make it a bit bigger actually. There you go. It allows you to view sections of the website in more detail. Okay, so let's just say, for an example, we wanted to have a look at the header. So you can see that their header is here. Okay, let's see if I can zoom in a bit for you. Too much. There we go. So you can see that they've got their header. Okay, and if I hover over header, you can see that the top of their page gets highlighted in blue. Okay, on the left. And that's saying that that is that website's header. And everything that's part of the drop-down is a part of that header. Okay. Now, they use a lot of something known as a div, which is... div is kind of like... You could picture it as kind of like a section within a section, essentially. If you don't want to call something a paragraph, if you don't want to call it an article, you can just put it inside of a div. It's kind of like a it's like as I say, it's like a section within a section. And what it does is it kind of like, it's like a container for information. Okay, so Andrew's put it inside of the chat as well. It's like a container for information that you can include on your website. Okay, so it's sort of like a container if you don't know what you want to include. But you can see that the div class, in this case they've got a div, they've given it a class called u-container. Inside of that is a nav, and that nav contains all of the links which are listed, as you can see, as a UL and LIs, okay, to all of the different pages within the Visit Wales website. Okay, so that's how you would structure links, okay, within your website. You use a UL and then a series of LIs, and you can see that this website, really advanced website, lots and lots of things going on it, but they're still using exactly the same features that you've learnt today. Okay, so web design all evolves around this idea, as you can see, of nesting, and about using a lot of really simple things which turn into using really advanced things overall. What we have on the right of the element inspector is a bit of CSS. Okay, so the CSS makes use of curly brackets, and what you can see is that they're actually you name a section and then you state exactly what you want to do with that section by using a series of keywords. But again, we'll go through those either next week or the week after. Okay, but this is again, our CSS isn't going to look quite like this, but this is sort of how it's going to look. This is a really useful tool that you can use with the element inspector as well. It allows you to view the padding, borders and margins of a section. And again, this is something that we'll be covering in the coming weeks, because the padding, border and margin can help you actually reposition things and structure things on your web pages. Okay, did you? Yeah. So as Trace has done, Trace has messed about with Google. You are free to actually edit web pages using the element inspector. Okay, so I would encourage you to, again, these edits aren't permanent. Okay, they're not going to sort of, destroy the website or whatever. Like Trace has done, he's completely messed with Google and everything's kind of disappeared. Okay, as soon as you close the element inspector, all of the changes that you made will be reverted. Okay, whatever changes you make in the element inspector, they don't make permanent change to the actual website. Okay, but what you can do is it allows you to kind of view and tinker with your website without directly editing it, which means that if you wanted to then edit your website or make a change and you weren't sure whether or not it was going to work, you can edit it using the element inspector, and then you can go back to Visual Studio Code or to whatever editor you're using and make the change after you've tested that it works in the web browser, so that you don't make any accidental permanent damage that you can't then undo. So I would definitely encourage that you have a look at that. Okay, it's worth taking a look at, and we'll be coming back to the element inspector in future weeks as well, because it will help you to kind of see and restructure your website without making any major changes. Okay, so we're coming up to the last sort of 20 minutes now of the session, and what we're going to do is just reserve this time for you to ask us questions, for you to kind of make suggestions, for you to, if there's anything that you want to mention or put forward, then go for it. Okay, but we're here now for another 20 minutes to have any suggestions or to answer any questions that you have. Just put them forward and we will do our best to answer them. But I hope that you have all enjoyed this kind of introduction to HTML. I know that a lot of you have already started to get familiar. I've seen a lot of the work, of course, that you've been putting up in the Discord in the past over the summer, and I know a lot of you are familiar with HTML and things like that already. But for those of you who are new to it, I hope that you've had a nice little introduction to it today, and that you've learned something new. I would remind you all as well to please save your projects. Now, you don't necessarily have to have this as your main sort of final project, okay? It's certainly not something that you need to have as your main final project if you don't want to, okay? This could just be your kind of sort of taster into it. But if you do want to use what you've produced today as what you're going to be using as your main project, then please make sure that you save it. So on CodePen, you can hit the big save button with a cloud next to it if you've got an online account, and that will then save your CodePen that you've made today to your online account. Okay, and that will then it'll be up there so that you can access it every week. If you are using VS Code or any other platform, Notepad++, please make sure that you save that locally, so that you can access it again next week. Okay, ready for us to carry on in the coming weeks. So on that note, does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? So I think everybody seems quite happy. No, nothing in the chat, and yeah, that's fine. So what we'll do then is Andrew and I will stick around for a little while longer, just in case some of you do have any other questions. As we are coming up to sort of like the last quarter of an hour now, if any of you want to kind of finish up there, that's absolutely fine. But Andrew and I will stick around just in case any of you want to ask us anything. But if any of you want to go off and finish up there, that's absolutely fine. Or you're free to stick on if you do want to hang around for a bit. That's absolutely fine with me. I'm sure some of you might have homework to do as well.
Is everyone back in school now as well? Quite a few on Discord now.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few people have come up as online, which is pretty good.
My question at the start is, who's done web development before? Who's tried to do some kind of web basic development?
Okay, nice.
Before Chris, is it some basic websites, or is it just something learning HTML?
Oh, nice. That's pretty good. So have you used any JavaScript before then, or just HTML and CSS? Because you can still make some pretty cool websites with HTML and CSS on their own. You know, you don't need to have yeah, so cool. So you don't necessarily need to have JavaScript to make a website look super cool. You can just use HTML and CSS, and you can have a really nice, well put together website. But what the JavaScript does is it kind of adds another layer of funkiness to your website. So I had an assignment, one of my last assignments for my module on web design was to build my own website. Okay, so what I did was I actually built a TechnoCamp's website as an example. I haven't actually got it on my PC, so unfortunately I can't show it to you. But I built a sort of a TechnoCamps website, um, and what I did with the JavaScript was I had a image carousel. So on the Visit Wales website, they've got kind of like a slideshow here, which kind of, and mine didn't look quite like this, but what I had was like an image gallery with arrows on either side, and I would click on the arrows and then it would move on to the next image. So it was, I used JavaScript to program that image carousel to flick through the images, so that when it reached, so that way I could have like a slideshow of images on every on the home page. Okay, um, there are lots of things that you can do, lots and lots of different things that you can do with JavaScript. I'm not quite sure what we're going to focus on just yet. If because what you can do on a website is quite in a way it's quite limitless, but there are things obviously that we're going to focus on and over others. Um, if you have suggestions, do put them in the Discord. There's no guarantee that we'll be able to do them, but if you do have any ideas of what you would like us to do, we will try our best to kind of incorporate that into the sessions.
And that's kind of where the project works as well, because you can look at a website for inspiration and go, I will build the answer to this.
Yeah.
He hit a smiling face in the top right corner of his share screen. Builds the answer. I'm sweating now from the pressure.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, with a project you can find inspiration and we can help you look at finding a solution. Maybe a slightly different solution. Nice.
Yeah. So when we go back to looking at JavaScript, you'll find again that we are JavaScript is quite an interesting language in the sense that it doesn't it uses, as we saw with Minecraft last week, it uses a lot of curly brackets, and it uses an awful lot of nesting and things like that. But the concepts behind JavaScript are very much the same to what we've been looking at in previous weeks with block-based programming and Python, in the sense that it uses for loops, variables, if statements. JavaScript follows the conventions of an ordinary programming language, whereas HTML and CSS are slightly different, and they're much more high-level languages. Okay, even more high-level in some ways than things like Python. Even though Python is considered a high-level language, a language which is of course a language that's very near or similar to just spoken English. You could say that HTML and CSS are even higher level languages, in the sense that you are saying exactly what you're naming things exactly as you would sort of say them in spoken English. So section, image, article, okay, main. They're all. It's even in a sense. It's an even higher level language than English. And as we saw, as Python, and as we've seen with the element inspector on the Visit Wales website, if we are looking at CSS, you can see that there's things like overflow, width, height, margin, padding, background color. Okay, they're all they're just it's just how you would say it. So it's important to bear that in mind, that it's very high level language. Has anyone thought of anything that they want to add?
We can't see any comments, but talking of comments, what can I present today is comment his code. And knows his code off by heart, but do comment in your code, so when you come back the following week during the coding clubs,
Yeah, absolutely. So we've of course mentioned commenting in the past as being one of the things that's really quite important uh, when you are writing code, because you need to remember, um, you need to be able to remember exactly what each page is doing, um, because you don't want to, oh, sorry, not, well, what each page is doing, but you also need to know what each line of code is doing as well, because you don't want to be in a position where you forget what your bit of code is doing. So HTML has a bit of a weird way of supplying comments, but I'll give an example of that now. So let's just say I wanted to say what the this body, that this section was representing the main body of content. Okay, the HTML comments, the more conventional way of doing it, would be by saying an opening tag, you'd put an exclamation point, a double slash, and then you would say this is a comment, and then you would then close that up with an arrow like that. So essentially what you've got there, you can see it's not appeared in my actual website, but this is reminding us of what a comment is. Okay. In CSS and JavaScript, it's similar to ordinary um, comments, but HTML's got a slightly weird way of doing it, and that is how you would put a comment in HTML. I'll just put that doc type back at the top there so that we can remind ourselves that we need it. It doesn't ordinarily in CodePen, you wouldn't need to put doc type, but if you are using something like VS Code, you will need to put a doc type at the top. But that is a comment, and again, it's important that you include those in your websites.
Why do people think we include comments? We've got a few minutes to get some feedback. Why do we include comments in all of our programming languages and the work that we do? So for me, if I was including comments, if we were working on a website, Dan could be the HTML guy, so he works on HTML. He understands that through and through. Maybe I'm just a CSS guy, so I only understand CSS. So we would comment our work separately. So when we look at each other's work, we can work out what aspect of the website we're looking at and how we can implement our part of CSS into HTML, HTML into CSS. So without even seeing each other, we're working from our distance, which is what we're having to do at the moment. Having the comments in the code is very important for other people you work with on the same projects. It goes across to game development, anything that is programming. There isn't just one person who develops the entire game. Well, in rare cases, in often there is, but most likely it's a collection of people, and people from different time zones potentially. So having comments in the code for you to easily navigate through and find different areas is very beneficial. Otherwise, you would have to go through the code line by line and try and work out what the other guy was doing because you can't get in touch with him. Hopefully that helps, and that's the reason why we do need comments in the code.
Yeah, and it also spans across as well to if any of you eventually decide to study something like computer science at university, when you are writing code, one thing that's really important when it needs to get marked and things like that is that you have comments, because the person who's marking, and as Andrew said there, and GCSE and A level, okay, any level, if you are marking, when you are, yeah, that's fine, Chris, no problem. Thank you for joining. But when things are being marked, the person who's marking your work will need to know exactly, might not know what you're trying to do in a specific place, or you might need to explain why you're doing something. And that's the importance behind commenting as well, is so that when other people are viewing your code, it shows an understanding it shows that you understand it, and that the person who's marking your code can also understand exactly what you're trying to achieve. So since nobody else has got any questions, I don't think, we're going to wrap up. We'll wrap up there for today. As Andrew mentioned earlier, we're planning on around 2 months worth of content, so approximately 8 weeks of stuff on web design, and looking at HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If any of you have any questions or anything that you want to suggest that we do, please put them in the Discord. As well, if any of you have any suggestions to time changes that you want to give to help fit around your schoolwork or anything like that, then please let us know. We'll probably have to stick it on keep things on a Wednesday. Okay, it'll have to be on a Wednesday afternoon. But time-wise, if any of you have any changes that you want us to make, then let us know. But Wednesday afternoons will be where it'll have to stay, just as long as we can change. If any of you want to change the time that we run the sessions for, then let us know in the Discord, and we'll see what we can do about that. But other than that, we're going to wrap it up there, I think. So thank you to everybody who's joined today. I hope it's given you a bit of an introduction into HTML, and as I said, we'll start looking at things a bit further in the next few weeks. So Andrew, I'll stop the stream there, and then I will talk to you quickly in Techno Team.